In this class, we're going to talk about layouts in Figma and what happens to the design when we have small variations in the width of the screen. From the beginning of the course, we know that we're designing a customer-facing application that will be developed in Angular for desktop size. What we don't know, and we can't know, is the exact size of each desktop screen that will display my application in the future, as in this case, where we see three screens that possibly have small variations in size between one and another. To solve this, as a designer, I must anticipate the behavior of each of the elements on the screen and decide what I want to happen with each one in each case. Let's see it in Figma. Here we see the attraction screen of my application. One of them is in default state, and the other has the settings that I mentioned. If we increase the width of the screen on the left, we'll notice that the elements do not change. In fact, they all move to the left. This suggests that these elements are somehow pinned to one of the sides. On the other hand, if we decrease the size of the frame, we'll note that the screen is cut off. Let's now analyze what happens with the screen on the right. For this case, we make the necessary adjustments so that, if we enlarge or shrink the width of the frame, the elements are scaled to fill the new space. Of course, these adjustments will be functional if the size variations are small. We cannot expect the same design to readapt from desktop to mobile size. Logically, if the change is abrupt, the design will break, as we see here. For these cases, we must define breakpoints, where the design of the screen is completely different. Here, for example, are the design variations of the attractions page for tablet and phone. These are all design decisions, and I have to make them known to the front-ender. Before we start looking at the properties that allow us to define these elements' behaviors, we have to see the ways I have in Figma to group these elements and the properties of each one. We're going to talk about groups, frames, and auto layout. In this case, I have three independent ways. If I want to group them, I can do it using groups or frames. Let's see their differences. Groups are generally used to move a set of elements. They're displayed in the Layers panel with a square of dotted lines. They have no background, and if I select the elements inside the group by double-clicking, I can only see their width, height, and position properties. Frames are containers. In addition to having the elements together, I have them in a space that contains them and that in turn has properties. They're displayed in the Layers panel with a frame icon. To these frames, I can give a background color and a border color, or even round the vertices. If I select the elements inside the frame, in addition to the properties I mentioned in the groups, a constraints section is added. By default, all the elements are pinned to the left, just as they were in the attraction screen without adjustments. Constraints are some of the properties that will be used to define the behavior of the elements. For example, if we modify the width of this frame, all the elements remain on the left. However, if we pin the ellipse to the right, for example, we see that it stays on that side when we modify the size of the frame. Another property that I can set to both groups and frames is auto layout. This will allow us to organize the set of elements, defining in which orientation I want them to be directed, what's the distance between them, how I want them to be ordered among themselves, and if they'll have padding on their sides or top and bottom. In addition, when we use a container with auto layout, and inside we have one or more elements, we can define how the container behaves in relation to its content, and its content in relation to the container. Within the container properties, we have fixed or hug. That is to say, it adapts to its content. For the case of the content, we find the same two options of fixed or hug plus the fill container option. In this example, we see that the text field is stretched to reach the edge of the container without any major problems. But if we take the previous case as a reference, and each of the figures that are inside the auto layout were set to fill container, when stretching that container, they would be distorted completely. That's why it's
Esto puede
essential to
explicar
analyze what
y
happens
analizar
in
qué
each
sucede
particular
en cada
case.
caso particular,
And
sin
remember
perder de
that all
vista
the
que
information we
toda la
place in the
información que
design file
colectamos en el
will
archivo
somehow
de
be matched
diseño
in
de alguna
Genexus,
forma se va
as
a
you'll see
corresponder en
later with
Figma,
Ceci.
como verán más adelante junto a Ceci. A
As a
modo de
summary of
resumen
this
de esta
class,
clase,
we
podríamos
could say
decir
that to
que para
define how
definir
each
cómo se van
on-screen
a
element will
comportar
behave
cada
when
uno
there
de
are
los
small
elementos de la
variations in their
pantalla
width,
ante variaciones mínimas en su
I'm going to
ancho,
work
se puede
preferably with
trabajar
auto layout frames,
preferiblemente con
constraints
frames
properties,
con
and the
autolayout,
fixed,
las
hug,
propiedades
and
de
fill
constraint
properties.
y las propiedades fixed, hug y fill.
Now let's go back briefly to the initial screens. Did you notice at the beginning of the class that when I modified the screen settings, something happened in the footer? Let's take a closer look. Can you see? Let's modify it. I think that if we set the set of social network icons with the fill behavior, and inside the auto layout, we pin it to the right, and leave the footer container fixed and pinned to the left, this behavior will be resolved. Finally, I want to share with you a simple way to measure the distance between elements. If I select an element and press the Option key in Mac or Alt in Windows and hover the cursor over another element, it'll show how far apart they are.
En el próximo
In the
video
next
trabajaremos
video,
junto a Ceci
you'll work
en
with
cómo
Ceci on
interpretar
how
este
to
archivo de
interpret this
diseño
design
e
file and
implementarlo en
implement it in
Genexus para que
Genexus
la
so
aplicación
that the
luzca y
application
se
looks and
comporte de la
behaves in the
forma que
way we've
acabamos de
just
decir.
defined.